Yo, what's up, world? This is Dane Tomas, and you're listening to the Dane Tomas podcast. Every week, I talk to experts, weirdos, new friends, and old ones about everything from magic to business to creativity and human awakening. So, strap yourself in, lay back and relax, cause we're heading straight for the black hole. And we are on. Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, Dane.
Thanks for doing this, bro.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
So, bit of micro context before we get into it. I was just telling Jimmy, like, for the bulk of these podcasts, I'm like, and this is my friend, blah, blah. And it's like not mentioning that they're a world champion octopus wrestler or whatever. But, and I'll do my best to get this right. But Jimmy, you're a Chinese medicine doctor. You've trained in also Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan medicine. You have founded a social entrepreneurship operation, which I'd like to get into with you. You've been personally insulted by the Dalai Lama, which just kind of sounds awesome. And you've given, I looked at your list, like just billions of keynote speeches and so on. You've done a lot of cool shit, man.
Yeah, I've been fortunate.
Yeah. Well, look, I'll just frame this up. Like the reason I wanted to get you and where I met Jimmy, for those listening, I met him at a yin yoga training where he had been enlisted to do the Chinese medicine and the 5 elements and the sort of Taoist components. And he gave the strongest, most alive transmission of those teachings that I've ever been exposed to. And I have a bit studied those areas, but you were able to give like a really living transmission. And that kind of lit me up with an interest in like, who's this guy? Like, he seems like he really not just gets this stuff, but embodies this stuff. And then, like, I'd heard of you before, but I started reading your blog. A lot of my friends and followers have started reading your blogs since then. And you write these kick-ass blogs. And I love this whole, like, they're addressed like sweet friend, they're like this poetic kind of transmission. So, I wanted to get you on and just go deeper with some of those knowledge and frameworks that you have that in my experience are not common.
One of the pieces just that comes to mind there is about tradition, and I may have got this wrong, but I thought you would use the word living tradition, and if not, then that's what I heard inside that. And that is that as someone that's spent a lot of time, studying things from the past, really, and looking in that direction, it's taken me some decades to come to the conclusion that traditions are all like dried shit sticks. They're something that the Zen masters of the world understand are dead, empty traps, right? And this is someone who's actively engaged in preserving and upholding and contributing to those traditions, right? They're my deep passion. But I think it's really, really important is that what we're looking for is living tradition.
Yeah.
And when they're written down in books and when they just become dry principles, then it's like, the story of the guy that's like, there's a signpost that says Rome that way, and he climbs up on top of the signpost and sits on it and then gets all dogmatic about defending Rome whilst he's just sitting on a signpost, kind of that sort of thing. That's the kind of literalism and dogma that leaves us on the outside of those traditions. And what we're looking to is try to look where they are pointed, to go in on a similar journey, to use them as a guide, but not just to have a series of external facts or dogmas about whatever that tradition is, because then it's a terrible trap to thinking. It does not lead to the destination that those other wonderful people trod, and so that's the irony, is that in order for tradition to be alive, it has to break with tradition. It has to become alive in someone, and then when it comes alive in someone, then they present it, through the lens of their own soulful journey.
And that's 100% what I saw in you. And, I don't know if this is just how it is in the world or it's just the journey that I've had, but I've had a lot of exposure to Tantra. And a lot of that has been, the way I learned about chakras, it was like, boom, this person embodies that chakra. I can feel it. But then when I had learned elements of traditional Chinese medicine and elements of Taoist sort of philosophy, it was more like with a whiteboard and like, these are the 5 elements and this is the yin yang. And it was like, you're the first person. I was like, oh, he gave me the water element transmission. And he gave me the transmission, like there's this spiel you did about the deep water. And I remember going home and being like, oh my God, I get it. And there's this piece I was mentioning to you before, which I feel like could be a great place to open up, which is, within, and I don't even know what collectively the right piece we're talking about, if it's kind of Taoism or the 5-element theory from Chinese medicine, but a lot of people who are listening to this probably have exposure to yin yang, I'm very sure, and they probably have exposure to the 5 elements of, Chinese Taoist philosophy or energy medicine or wherever they probably came to it through acupuncture or kinesiology. A lot of my crew have been exposed to, but that model for me just sort of floated in space as like just a complete model that I was taught, and I never really thought about how that might have come together. And you shared this insight on your grasp of how that those narratives came together, and it just blew me away with the context. So I wonder if we could tap into like, what's your take on that? Where did that come from?
So there's the joiner to my previous sentiments and this exploration is that a terrible thing that we can do to a living tradition is to kind of deify it, and to then make it like a closed, finished divine revelation, like a Bible, right? And as soon as that, because they weren't, none of them were, the idea of, like one of the reasons that Ayurveda has stagnated for, hundreds of years, and the reason why the Western tradition kind of stagnated and then died is because Ayurveda is like a complete system kind of revealed by the gods. So how can you improve upon it?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that? But it really wasn't. That's not where it came from. It evolved, it emerged, it went through many iterations, and we know that now. And I think it's really important to be able to hold that in relation to all of these traditions. And so Chinese medicine didn't just sort of pop, come roaring out of, the side of Zeus's head like Athena did, whole and, just gestated like that. It's like, here they are. And it's this whole system complete.
Yeah.
It didn't come like that. It came about, as did all of these similar systems, over millennia. And I think the story of the emergence of these kind of models and then their decline is a great talking point for sort of, a lot of what's going on in the world today. So if we cast our minds back, then we can see that the hunter-gatherer folk of the world, not just in China, in all sorts of areas, then the patterns that they identified socially or, politically, if that's relevant, cosmically, energetically, psychologically, whatever the studies that you want to pull in there, they identified patterns, and then they gave them they said, because the right brain is constantly exploring the unknown and you then giving an image that it's like. So you encounter something it's never seen. It says, it's like the ocean. It's like the jaguar. It's like the sun. No, it's like the moon, right? And so when we encounter something unknown, that's the wonders of the right brain, right? It's so important. Creates these images to it. And the hunter-gatherer folk of all of us, all of our ancestors, they grabbed the images of the natural world and they used them as complex patterns. It's like if something's like the moon, then, it waxes and wanes, perhaps, it shifts, it comes out at the night, whatever aspect of that thing, it's not the sun. And, like the moon can mean like the moon in lots of different ways, And so grabbed these particular symbols, and there was lots of them, and there was lots and lots of them. And so the cosmos, the elements of creation it's a polytheistic. There's, platypus dreaming, there's coyote mother, there's grandfather time, there's the winds, there's the 4 winds, there's the 3 fates, there's, the spider woman, shaman weaving grandmother who, knits all these things, all of these things, right? There's lots and lots and lots of them. There was lots of patterns that were identified by lots of different people. Is that making sense so far?
Yeah, it's killer. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and so we're dealing with the mythopoetic, and this is the bedrock of, it's kind of our collective unconscious, this is what Joseph Campbell and so many of Jung and everyone was studying, is this incredible creation of these dreams of cultures that have come through and been refined. They've had to evolve like, Darwinian process. This story comes and then it gets added to this bit, and then that bit didn't work, it goes like this. And there's lots of them. There's no real version. There's just many just bubbling forth. So we've got this bedrock of all of these, and it's out of that bedrock that these later formal traditions come out, like Ayurveda or Taoism or, Greek medicine and philosophy or Tantra, all those, any of the things that you're thinking of, or most of them, they're all the product of agricultural minds, people that have passed through out of that hunter-gatherer time. And so this is one of these amazing shifts that takes place, because hunter consciousness it's diffuse and multifaceted. You don't know what you're hunting necessarily, and you don't know what's hunting you, and it's everywhere. And so there's a broad, diffuse openness that takes place, right, towards a goal that you haven't quite yet articulated, just that you're going hunting and you are probably being hunted. Whereas farmer agricultural consciousness, and so many of the peoples that we're talking about here have passed through that, then it's very focused on a directed goal. I plant the seed, it grows in this time, I water the thing, and that will yield me this much grain, and I can keep that, a certain amount goes to the seed. It has a linearity to it almost. Does that make sense?
It does. It feels like the birth of spreadsheets,
Yeah,
on the metaphysical version, you've got your little grids of fields or rice paddies or wheat or whatever. Yeah.
It's still deeply rooted in the cycles of nature. So from where we stand at the moment, compared to sort of binary and mechanistic and steam engine kind of models and images that we live by, it's still it feels incredibly whole, right? But just to be clear, the 5 elements of Chinese medicine, they're an abstraction that only comes out in after the agricultural revolution. And it's the same with the Greek thought like that, and the Ayurvedic thought like that, Tibetan, and all of these things, they all, Egyptian, they're all come out at this time. And then they create these very neat, linear, abstract models with the dominance of the left brain, in this time, right? And so, something like metal as a fundamental symbol for a force within the universe you're not going to get a symbol like that coming out of the Amazon or Australia. You don't, right? But those symbols were actually just tapped on top of the older hunter-gatherer symbols, which had gone from many, many, many to then being distilled down over a period of time to saying, actually, there's just 4 or 5. And the 4 or 5 that it gets distilled down with this process of seeing there's all these things, and actually all these things are just a small handful of things, then one of the ways to see that is through the 4 directions, because east is always where the sun rises. It's always where the day is born. It's always where the light emerges. And west is always death. It's always ending. It's always where the day goes, where the sun goes to die, where it goes into the underworld, where the darkness comes from, right? And the north, in the northern hemisphere, is where winter is. It always gets colder the further you go. You always have to go inside more. You always have to store up. And towards the equator, you always got better parties, right? The further you go towards the equator, the better the parties, right? The ukuleles, the coconuts. You're wearing less, you're more sociable, there's more food. You're not storing up potatoes in a cave, right? So those directions are primary experiences. And then the gods get arranged around that mandala of wholeness, right? And so this is where the 5 elements, they get laid on top of what was once the black tortoise of the north, and the red phoenix or the vermilion bird of the south, the white tiger of the west, and the blue-green dragon of the east with the gold dragon at the center. That then becomes metal, water, wood, fire, earth as they pass through a lot of cultural changes, right? But they get a little bit more abstract, those models. They become a little bit more, they're beautiful, but the elements are abstract, another level of abstraction from animals. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's really, especially for those of us that work with these models a lot, we can really get comfortable in, well, that's just true. Everyone knows that. That's true. And for me, I'd come from the Western esoteric sort of tradition first. So it's 4 elements, and it's like, everyone knows that. There's 4 elements and this is what they are. And then when I came via the door of kinesiology to Chinese 5 elements, I was like, that's crazy. There can't be 5. There's 4.
Yes.
And it was a real, like I've read, in the kind of startup world of Silicon Valley stuff, there's whole projects that fall apart because coders having a different opinion of a coding syntax. You put spaces there. You don't put a space. You put a dot there, and it's like there's almost like a walkout of this like religious dogma of like they put spaces in between. I can't believe you hired them, and it's like they put dots in between. They're the worst kind of Philistines. Get them out of here.
Yeah. Don't trust them to make your coffee.
And it's this, this NLP axiom of the map is not the territory is really useful for those of us that get good particularly in one particular framework or a couple of particular frameworks, because everything starts to fit those frameworks so beautifully. And I see it in the sort of Tantra mystery school crossover where I hang out a lot. We have some really refined agreements around light, dark, masculine, feminine. Light masculine, dark masculine, light feminine, dark feminine. And we all have a lot of embodied anchors of what those things are. And as soon as you start chatting with someone who's either less initiated into this cult or from just a different world, it's like, what? That's not dark masculine. That's dark feminine. That draws things in. It doesn't penetrate them. And it's like, you're wrong about reality, And it takes quite a commitment to undo all this and be like, reality is outside of these models, even though they're really, really powerful models. So that's a piece. Yeah.
They're maps. And when we're arguing about them, then we're on the outside of them as well. You're like, they're like the signpost. The other one is the story of the Zen apprentice who asked the Zen master one day what the moon was, and the master just pointed at the moon. And then when the apprentice was down the village and he's getting teased, and they said, well, if you're the apprentice of the big fancy Zen master, show us what you've learned, enlightenment boy. And he was just like, well, I bet you don't know what the moon is. And the kid's like, no. And the kid holds out his finger. And so, like asking for the moon and getting the finger, right? That's what happens in the new age when you're lost arguing about dark masculine and dark feminine, because the point of these living images is not the abstraction of thought that happens as you debate them or take them into your head, but that they must enter you. The Greek word is eidolon, and it's like a spirit. That's why indigenous people don't want their photo taken. Images are real things. They're spirits. They're living stuff. It's like a kiss is real. A marriage is real. An economy is real. You can't pick any of them up, but they're real, right? And an image is real. And those images that you're talking about, in order to be living, they must just enter you. You hang out with them. You feel them. They go in and they muck around with your unconscious. They knit things together and tear down other things. And as soon as you're back in the level of mind and argument, you got the finger instead of the moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're on the outside of it.
I sometimes get this sense that these big ideas are using us much more than we're using them, and especially in models like spiral dynamics and that kind of stuff. It's like, the green meme is coming in, feminism is coming in, and it's you think you're using it, but it's using you. Or I was revisiting the book Sapiens the other day, and there's this bit where he talks about humans didn't domesticate wheat. Wheat domesticated humans. Who really benefited from this arrangement? You know, these free hunter-gatherers, they start building a relationship with this grain. And it's like they're the ones who started living in houses to tend to this fragile thing that could be ruined by rats or mold, and
Yes.
digging holes and doing things that human bodies weren't that good at. Actually, wheat took us over, you know, and it just blew me away. Of like, it's almost like a Neil Gaiman-esque mythical concept, but this is a historian saying, like, you know, who was the real winner here? Wheat. That's who the real winner was.
W.H. Auden said, "We are lived by forces we do not understand."
Yeah.
And Jung said, "People don't have ideas. Ideas have people."
Yeah, that one is strong for me. Yeah.
It's the same direction. So we were tracing this story, right? So we went from the hunter-gatherer period into the 5-element bit. And then to make the story neater, and it has some good historical kind of backing as well, is that then from seeing that there's 4 or 5 things, and when there's 5 things, it's just 4 things with a center. So it's not, it later got arranged in a funny pattern, but it was 4 things with a center originally. So the 5 and the 4, there's no argument there. Well, there's 4 elements or there's 5 elements. It's kind of, they're missing the point entirely. They're getting the finger on that one.
Yeah.
And then broadly then all over the world, roughly in a similar period of time, then there's this revolution that takes place sometime between the sort of 6th or 7th century BC and maybe the 5th or 4th, depending on where you are, right? And this is in Greece and in China and India and some other places as well, is that our fundamental sense of dualism, which was always present in a bunch of our mythology, you know, sky father, earth mother, you know, penis, vagina, sun, moon, you know, like there's those notions have deep roots all the way through, right? But then around this time, then they got formalized into these models like the yin yang model, and the yin yang one is the easiest and neatest, and it's got the best picture attached to it. But you know, in the West we had Heraclitus, and he was all about this, and you know, similar sort of stuff goes through different cultures, right? And it's just like there's these 2 things, and you can't separate them. Like it's just like trying to carve off day from night, and on top of it, it's the one thing. That which we call day and that which we call night is one, and therefore that which we call good and that which we call bad is one thing, like the sky. So what color is the sky when it's not day or night? Apply that to good and bad, right? Or order and chaos, or relative and absolute, or a range of those things that we are so wedded to. And there's this revelation that from those 2 things that are interpenetrated, behind it all is this one thing. And so that's the Tai Chi symbol in the Taoist cosmology. And that's Brahma, or, you know, you can put a range of different bits on there on the schematics that show immanence and transcendence and how stuff comes into the world. And so that movement from polytheism and a pluralistic hunter-gatherer consciousness towards a more linear agricultural process, even though there's cycles, it's a linear focus towards other things, has, for the purposes of my grand theory of everything, and I'm skipping over details, right, has led towards, one, the dominance of the left brain throughout time, right? But 2, towards forms of monotheism. And that monotheism is actual monotheism in a range of cultures, right? But in China, you could say, well, they're not monotheistic. I was like, yeah, they are. They're communist.
Yeah,
that's a monotheism.
There's one big idea that we all agree on. Yeah,
that's right. So we've gone from truth being, God having 1,000 different eyes, the eyes of the panther, the eyes of the praying mantis, the eyes in the leaf, in the water, in the river, in the sun, that God has many different faces, and that many different perspectives are possible, and truth must be seen from many different perspectives, because we're walking through the jungle looking out for what we're hunting, but we don't know what it is, and what's hunting us, but we don't know what that is either, right? Broad openness and the right brain's love of plurality towards something that leads to the left brain, which is better at organizing systems once we know something, right? And is less metaphorically inclined and is very convincing. It does all the talking in our minds. And then this monotheism of there's one truth, there's one perspective, there's one thing, right? And so today, here in the world, when we're dealing with isms, like in talking about people that are possessed by ideas, is everyone's got an ism that are possessed by an idea that has them, like wheat got us, right? Is whether it's capitalism or communism or feminism or materialism or spiritualism, it just doesn't matter which God has got you, which ism has got you. You've got this one thing. And then during COVID, we've really seen the way that duality and polarity, just communities tearing each other apart, because we've lost those underlying myths that allow us to say this is one thing. And so you're either with me or you're the enemy, you know?
Yeah.
It's victim and perpetrator all the way through, right?
Yeah.
And so I think having a sense of this movement of ideas throughout history, and then looking deeply at some of these things that a range of people have picked up and looked at superficially in the last 30 years, you know, 5 elements or yin and yang, they're medicines that we need to stitch our fragmented minds and hearts back together, and to help any chance of sanity in this insane world that we live in lays, I believe, in digging back into our past, in the same way that, you know, you and I go through therapy and look at our childhood. Collectively, at this point in history, we need to go back and dig back in and look at those dreams, which are our collective mythology. Look at our past and say, how do we end up in this? How did Trump end up president of the most powerful country in the world? Which point of history did we go wrong there? You know, how far back do we have to look?
Yeah. Far, I think, as well.
Far. I think so too. I think it's a long way back.
When we get to the isms, it's very interesting, because one of the things I have trouble with is buying a whole ism. You know, I'm a person who likes to go, well, I agree with that bit, but I don't know about that piece of language. That little bit of code there, I don't really want to put in my system. It's like someone who is open to vaccines potentially, but only if they can see the ingredient list. That's how I feel about idea packets, you know? It's like, oh, I could be down with that. Some of those ideas sound great. Some of these others that you guys have, that seems completely insane from where I'm sitting. And
yes,
what I find is there's this convenience, especially let's say you got your ism from you're 21 and you're at uni and you get into your, whatever your peer group is, you know, you're either the lawyers who become young liberals, or you're super punk rock. So you become a feminist with, you know, pink in your hair or whatever. And then you get a whole packet, and some people seem to sort through the contents of that packet, and other people just go, right, I've got the packet, I've got the kit, I've downloaded the language, these are the maps and models, I'm good to go now, you know? And I wonder, I guess you're someone that I would see like myself, but maybe sitting in a different position socially and so on, that you're probably on the crux of a few different worlds. And what I'm thinking about particularly is, you know, the conspiracy world versus the science world as one example. And also I know where you live, and I know the sort of culture of the areas. Sound a bit anonymous. I know where you live. But, you know, I have context. I live in not very far away, you know, Byron, Yukai, etc. I know some of the politics and narratives that comes with certain social groups and so on. So I'm really wondering, I don't know, I'd love to get your perspectives on how you balance the science and the woo, for want of a better word.
Well, I guess one of the things is just that the question itself asks me to assume that they're different, you know? And so that's, I think my answer starts there, right? And woo is a little hard, but let's call it religion to make it simpler, whether it's New Age religion, chakra religion, or, it's a something, spirituality, religion, da, da, da. And so that
Are we
dichotomy,
filing like lizard people, pedophile elite in that category? Where does that go? Can we throw that in the mix?
I think we can. I think we can. I think, for the purposes of the point that I want to make, I think we can place a range of different weird religions inside there as well, right? Inside our WHOO pole that we think is different. And the deep assumption is that science is just fundamentally different to that. And that these things are really opposed to each other, right? And I think that assumption is really the problem that we have in so many different ways. Is what is polarizing us is that we're constantly just splitting things into opposites that then we must fight against.
Yeah.
Are you on the left wing or the right wing?
It's the problem with the model of just two,
That's right. A superficial model of the two that doesn't see them as, embraced in cosmic orgasmic unity in some way, right? As necessity, like it's a serpent biting its tail, or whatever the image is.
I'm seeing the yin yang, but a certain teacher just forgot to teach his students the dot, so they just passed it down as there's no dot of the opposite. It's just like there's a white bit and a black bit at the end.
Yeah. And it's a square, not a circle, and they don't bleed into each other and give rise to each other. It's like, this is good, that is bad. This is truth, that is ridiculous myth, right? And so we put these things on it. But, this science is still a story.
Yeah.
It's still a story. It is, and it's a tricky story, because on the one hand, the methodology is there that enables us to make iPhones and, shoot rockets across the world that land exactly where you want them to, and, all of that sort of stuff. So it's got this methodology to it. But then arising from that raw methodology is very much a story, it's very much a story. And there's a culture, there's a myth, there's a ism. So there's science, there's methodological naturalism and the method of science, and then there's the church of science. And the church of science is every bit as dogmatic and fighting for your mind as the church of some other cult, right? It's just that, it defines it in different ways, and science is born in opposition to the church that it didn't like. And so being dogmatically atheist, well, that doesn't belong in science. Science has got no comment on the existence of God. It's just like, next question. So when you see Richard Dawkins, just like the God delusion, la, 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 frothing at the mouth and criticizing these fundamentalist religious guys who are also then like, blah, 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 whatever, all that sort of stuff. The similarities between these two.
He's not chill. He's not in a chill place of having integrated the opposites.
No, he's in a church. He's in an ism. He's possessed by a God and a story. And today, in terms of those oppositions, in terms of like the COVID experience that we've had with the science versus woo kind of piece, is that although they feel so different on the outside, and we see some people just like, look, the data is here and people are dying in New York or wherever the thing, and other people saying, no, listen, it's, it's 5G and there's this other piece, and they feel like they're very, very different. Underneath them is exactly the same meme that has got both sides. And that meme is related to control, and it's related to opposition, and it's related to blaming. And so each one is just, there's a simple sense of cause and effect, which is, linear and ultimately agricultural, in this piece where it came from. And it's then just finding different good guys and bad guys. And the bad guy could be the virus or the people that ate the bat, that thing, or, whatever the thing is, and or the bad guy is the rich people that put the stuff in the vaccine trying to control your mind, that, influenced by the aliens, or whatever the story is, right? And in response to the terrible uncertainty of just not knowing, then both sides control. It's a grip into certainty and try to grab a hold of that. And it feels like on the outside, you're like, no, these guys have nothing to do with each other. Richard Dawkins and some Texan minister, or, the hippies in Mullum and, a conservative doctor in the Gold Coast. Actually, we're in the same culture, and we're lived by the same gods. We're living out the same stories, the same broken lenses, in much more deeply than people are happy to admit, because it's very uncomfortable when you realize that.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable. I'm a bit like you, actually, that piece. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's difficult when you, and it's an identification too, but I've become over time more identified with being like an integralist, you know? So my religion has been the religion of blending the other religions and sort of a quantum influenced idea that it's all true and it's all not true, you know, which is useful in some settings.
Yes.
But it's very hard to occupy a position then, because it's like, well, I want to stand up and say this thing, but part of me also knows that from a different position, if I was to angle myself just another 5 degrees this way, I could actually say all the opposite stuff and still mean it. So it becomes a little, and if
You're like that hunter, you're sort of
yes.
like, you know, something's hunting you from but this different, you know, areas,
totally. Yeah.
right?
Or it's like, you know, Schrodinger's Jaguar or whatever, you know, it's there and it's not there. I know that it's there. It feels like it's there. It might not be there. It probably isn't there, you know. There's a lot of that goes on. And that's cool when I hang out with a lot of other people that are all into like integrating their opposites, which a lot of my crew is. But as soon as I cross out of the bubble, or I'm particularly if I'm speaking on a platform like Facebook that doesn't give nuance, and my message, sometimes let's say if I write a certain thing and that thing gets shared to like California, which happens a lot for me. And I've learned to talk differently because I now know that's a thing that happens for me. The message that makes sense to my kind of integral, yes, I can see he's talking archetypally, balancing the opposites crew, does not land the same way in like a staunchly, we're liberal and we're free and everything's equality and you can't say these words anymore. And it's like the message almost as it goes into that other atmosphere, it means a different thing, you know? And so especially where duality, I'm talking to my non-dual posse and that message leaks out to a dualistic realm where everything is either, you know, liberal or conservative, black or white, kind or cruel, right or wrong, you know? And it's like, ugh, that's very
There's
tricky.
no winning in such a space though. I mean, you can only in when you're dealing with those narratives and the world is gripped by it, you know, the right wing is gripped by it and the left wing is gripped by it. You know, I used to align myself as sort of left and now I don't want anything to do with the left. The left is just as nutty as the right in so many different ways, right? And, you know, look politically looking for a sensible center in some way because I'm not with either of those guys is how I feel. Right?
Yeah.
But, you know, when that's the game that's being played of good and bad and victim and perpetrator, then whichever way you align, you're going to be bad to a bunch of the players. And, you know, like you're going to be, you can either join up and be a good guy to these ones that are the victims, but then you're the perpetrator as far as the other person's concerned. Or, you know, if you don't occupy a clear position, you stand in the middle, you're a perpetrator to all of them because there's two labels, you know, there's victim and perpetrator. And of course people play that savior role in between, you know, but it's a game. There's no winning the game. There's no winning that particular game. And so I think it's a part of the game that's tearing the world asunder. Again, whether you live in the deep south of America or whether you move in, you know, very progressivist, you know, liberal kind of left wing socialist kind of radical circles that, you know, like politically correct, you know, it doesn't matter which discipline you're studying at the university, that piece is gripping our minds.
I moved to Byron Bay in 2015 and, you know, I thought it would just be this kind of free, progressive kind of place. I had these sort of stories, you know, and I remember, you know, going to like 5 rhythms at Wollumbin in my kind of brand new expensive Nikes with like $1,000 in cash in my pocket, you know, and I kind of walked in. I was like, this is wrong. You're a bad person. It was like I walked into a field of like, oh, this is like would be normal in Melbourne. And I'm kind of like a hip hop entrepreneurial dude. Like I like sneakers that you have to order online. You can't buy anywhere else. You know, there's a real just certain reality. And it's like, without even having a conversation, it's like I entered into that meme bubble, you know, the green meme in Spiral Dynamics.
Yes.
Like, ooh.
The mean green meme.
The very mean green meme. And it was like, you know, it's like without even having the conversations yet, I had them later, you know, and I have had those back and forths for a few years and have integrated some parts. But it's like I knew that it wasn't okay to wear a pair of Nike Air Max, which in the hip hop world is like, of course you would. That's the good sneakers to have, you know. If you're
not okay to not wear them.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you don't have a pair of, yeah, totally. Very interesting how quick it changes.
And so that's the irony, I think, of what's going on at the moment is, on the one hand, we've really disowned and moved on from and forgotten our tribal roots, right? And we all have tribal roots. And we've really forgotten the fundamental perspectives that orientated us in the cosmos from that time. Forgotten it all the way to the point of the level of left-right brain integration that was there at that point. It's not just forgotten, it's that, you know, we've sort of like aligned, you know, there's a split that actually goes through our neurology and our brain processes in so many ways. But having forgotten all of that tribalism and the ideas that helped regulate and guide it, it just comes out in unconscious, awful ways. And we're not less tribal in the 21st century than we were in, I don't know, the 5th or 6th century BC, millennium BC, where we're just unconsciously so. And it's terrifying, right? It's terrifying, the re-emergence of tribalism, right? And so, you know, and I'm all about the archaic aspects of the intent behind the archaic revival. You know, there's a lot of goodness to be looking back there and honoring those traditions. But the fragmenting and the tribalism that is going through our world at the moment can lead to some very, very messy and awful places, right? And part of that is because something that we could once believe in that could unify that, something that could transcend, it's like, oh, all these tribes were all a part of this thing. And that was like Christendom or, you know, the church or America. Is like, how many of us can like find something like that anymore? Like, it's very hard. We've lost faith in those big institutions. And so they've gone away, but they were helping to create something that prevented, I think, the kind of the divisive aspects of tribalism. And back in the day, they had the stories and the mythologies that were helping to hold that into a happy and balanced place. So we've ripped out the social tech, you know, the memes, the stories, the important things that helped us to be able to get to this place. And now we're going to have tribalism in overcrowded cities. You know, the masculinists and the feminists and the left and the right, you just list them all off.
Any set of polarities you want.
Any of them, they're all off, and they're all after blood, and they're all convinced that that salvation lies in the cessation of, you know, that thing. Once science can really kill religion, then we'll have utopia. You know, some people are really on that trip.
Right. It's funny, in the back of my head, I was just going a little Machiavellian, and I was like, if we could either have a real one or fabricate a war with the aliens, we'd have a good shot at sort of one world, you know?
Yes.
But it's just a bigger us versus them, you know? It's just
that's exactly the point. Unfortunately, it's a different bigger us versus them. And then as soon as that Orwellian external constant bad guy is kind of vanquished, when you can't have him vanquished, you always need something like that. Then you're going to turn on yourself and consume yourself. You know, if you're living inside a goodies versus baddies, cowboys versus Indians, us versus them polarity, it's a dangerous place. It's like a bar in the old West where there's lots of alcohol and loaded guns on everyone's hip. It's like, it's not a safe place to drink, you know?
Yeah, great. What a nice mixture, guns and alcohol.
That's right. But that's the modern world if you're living inside goodies and baddies. And as a therapist, I'm really aware of it. It's just like people, and especially if you become a public figure, anyone who's a public figure should be really aware of it. Because sooner or later, someone's going to be able to be like, perpetrator. And then they're going to you know, they're going to put all that stuff on you, bad guy, you know, you're going to be that. And then the culture sort of supports that in some sections of society.
Yeah, it has to.
Yes.
Do you want to pivot? Should we pivot a little?
Pivot.
I would love to hear a little bit about your social enterprise world, if you're open to getting into some of that.
Sure. So, after I finished my internship in Beijing in 2002 during the SARS COVID epidemic, you know, I was there at that point in a hospital getting temperatures taken and working on sick Chinese people back in the day. When I finished that, then I did a kind of 3-year sabbatical, just traveling around the world.
I just want to butt in and acknowledge that you were doing COVID before it was cool.
That's right. Thank you. I was definitely doing COVID before it was cool. And I got to go, you know, all over the place and hang out with the Dogon in Mali. I got to sort of see, you know, the Tibetan Medical Institute, and work in little village health cooperatives in Mexico. And I was really on my mission of exploring, you know, truth in a range of ways, but also medicine and tradition and healing. And I saw a few different things there. And one of them was I really, really saw how lucky I was. And so it went in quite deep after a few years of being in those countries on the road, of just like, well, if you take my passport and my money and my everything, I've had all this invested in me, and I've missed out on a bunch of different things being invested in me that are crippling, right? And so I just realized how really fortunate I was. And two, I saw traditional medicine centrally involved in healthy cultures, participating in making a culture healthy, and also at the front end of sort of medical care, seeing Ayurvedic hospitals where people are getting, you know, all sorts of different treatments for their needs. So I came back to Australia and I was like, well, I'm the lucky one. What am I going to do with the rest of my life now that I'm retired and 28 years old? I'm a billionaire by birth. So what am I going to do, you know? And my calling, my trade is traditional medicine. And so I founded a charity that at that point was called the Barefoot Doctors. And its goal was to, like the Barefoot Doctors in China, to bring traditional medicine and healing to the community sector, you know, to those that in need, because there's an unfortunate kind of ivory tower coming around wellness, where it's wonderful, but only the wealthy can afford any part of it, you know, the supplements, the treatment, the advice, the testing, you know. And so I made that and set up projects with, the first one was with survivors of torture and trauma in immigrant populations, and then one with refugees, and then one with youth in crisis. And at each point I would go and work there as a practitioner and get it going, and then bring in other volunteers and then kind of support them from outside, you know, through a cluster of projects going like that. And that was really the birth of it. It went on a long journey from there over 15 years to today. It's in a different place today, but that was that journey that has taken me along that into that world. And I guess the social enterprise part of it is that from when I was in India, I went to this hospital, and they had this massive big hospital that just treated the whole region for free or at very low rates, right? It was enormous, and there's all the locals there, and that was where I was spending my time. And then I found out that there's other little hospital over there where they treated I don't know, 2 or 3 dozen white people, and the proceeds from the little one over there is what paid for the big one over here. And that was before social enterprise was a model and a story and a word that had hit the world, you know, like there was charity and business, but there wasn't social enterprise, right? At that, back in, you know, in the late 90s and around about those sorts of times. And so I got really inspired by that. And so I tried to incorporate social entrepreneurship models, social enterprise models, business thinking into this project right from the get-go. But I was about 4 years too early at the launch date, because people just were like, is this a business or is this a charity? This sounds shonky to me. It's like, no, it's both. We're going to give you this corporate wellness service, and then we're going to use the proceeds to go and extend it to these groups over here. It's like, I don't know. They didn't like it. It took a while, it really took a while for everyone to catch up on them.
It's fascinating. It's the dualities again, it's like it can either be for you being selfish or for you being altruistic.
That's right.
It's like very linear. Yeah, which one is it? Do you want to give or do you want to receive? And it's like, I like exchange and creativity and magnification. And it's a real interesting journey that I've had, particularly working, I've done a lot of business mentoring and coaching of people that are more leaning towards the altruistic conditioning, so they want to heal, they want to help, et cetera. And the irony is they kind of need to unpack and tap into a bit of healthy, air quotes, selfishness and healthy ego to be able to actually have an impact. It's like that guy's a bit more greedy than you for himself, but he also serves like 1,000 people. And there's a dichotomy that I see often with I guess it's another polarity, seems to be a theme of our thread, but it's like the idea that selfish equals bad, that the self in spiritual circle, you shouldn't have a self, you shouldn't have an ego, even though a lot of the people teaching that have egos, and I've yet to meet anyone functioning without an ego. I accept there might be a handful floating around, but I don't have a lot of firsthand evidence of that. And I've met some pretty interesting, magical spiritual people, but this idea that, the ego needs to be deconstructed and removed for you to be good. And I don't even know where I'm going with this. I'll just throw it into the mixture. I wonder your thoughts on this kind of this spiritual paradigm of like, don't do it from ego.
Well, there's a couple of pieces in there. One, the person that is seemingly altruistic and living by a different narrative to everyone else who's still caught in the rampant 1980s kind of like just greed is good kind of thing. Like, oh, no, I want to help the poor people. It feels radically different until you get them into therapy and you realize, well, there's the victim, there's the perpetrator, and there's the savior, but they're living in the same myth. Yeah. They're in the same story. And so they necessitate each other in this way. And that's not to discredit altruism from the world. I'm not doing that at all. And neither am I trying to sully the good-hearted efforts of a large number of people all over the world. I've worked with a range of folk. I know their good intentions. But what I'm saying is that the framing is not going to result in the outcome that they seek. The savior is a perpetrator because they enable the myth to keep rolling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's problematic as well, right? When you're inside that story, and when altruistic people are often they have the savior piece, but they're identifying victims just like everybody else, and that's a tricky business. I understand
there's a real disempowering lens as well when you look at everyone through the lens of victims who need to be helped,
Yes.
I've hung out in the other end. I've hung out with some kind of hard ass business people who actually can be very empowering because there's something in their lens that says everyone could do it. You can do it, and it's kind of like, it's more of a masculine nurturance, if you like, air quotes for the listeners, since we're exploring how categories are, mentally assigned. But yeah, I've really noticed a lot of people who are tough entrepreneurs that are very profit driven and kicking ass. Actually, some of those guys are the ones who took their families to build a school wherever quietly, but they're more celebrated for like, we fucking kicked ass this quarter. Look what we did. But they actually have the choice to go and do that. And so there's this paradigm. I feel like we're similar, but we may be hanging out on the opposite ends and coming towards the center in what we're sharing. And that I I really enjoy some elements of capitalism, you know, and
Yes,
and
yes,
and have seen how if you bring consciousness into those areas, which can be, it's like your what you just said about altruistic people. There is no doubt that there are many toxic elements, and there are some shut down, hungry people in that world, but there are also some really well-adjusted, really amazing people playing the straight business game and doing good in the world, you know, and not wrapping it up as like charity or altruism. They're just doing their thing.
yes.
And it,
And so the piece that I think there, because it's such murky waters,
yeah,
that we're in, right? It's so easy. I can hear, like dozens of people in these imaginary comments kind of
yes,
flicking up in the
yes,
background with really good points, right? And they're right. It's like, yes, Esmeralda, that's true. That was not fair what I said. And what about yes, yes, yes? All these objections were like,
you're all
fuck,
right,
guys.
all of you.
Yes, I'm hearing those and feeling them, and I'm feeling how difficult this conversation is to have. And so, if I could tweak it a little bit, I would say that that we don't what we don't have an economic crisis on the planet, and we don't have an ecological crisis on the planet, and we don't have a political crisis on the planet, or a healthcare crisis, or an educational crisis, or a technology crisis. There's a much deeper crisis that underlies all of those, right? And it's that we bring a broken narrative to everything we touch. We're like King Midas, except it's King Fragmentos or something, like we just fragment everything. We can't see connections, right? And so there's a rot, and there's a sense of it. And COVID has highlighted it at this particular time of just like, wow, how, we thought the empire was dressed, and now the empire's got no clothes. There's a lot of people that are suddenly just like, geez, it's more fragile. Whoa, the propaganda. Which one do we trust, right? So the rot goes, the problem, the wound, rot is wrong. The wound is so much deeper than the conspiracy theorists or the ecologists or the social sector folk are looking at a lot of the time. It's so much deeper. And in some ways, by participating in the same story with good intent, then we set up an ambulance at the bottom of a cliff, right? The people keep falling off that bloody cliff, right? And we can feel good and put our hand on our heart as we set up an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. But wow, what we really need to do is stop that avalanche of human flesh that's falling through the gaps, and not just human flesh, but the environment and everything else, right? And so when we're talking about that piece of those, the problems of some of the well-intentioned, wonderful, open-hearted, feeling, high in empathy and stuff folk, is that whilst living out the story that is killing us all, that's spitting us all off that cliff, right? Whilst enabling and participating it with your ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, you're doing no favors to the next generation that are coming along. The change that's required right now is much, much deeper, right? It's at a foundational level. And I guess that's where it comes back to the individual in so many ways, because when the answer that we developed, I believe, in the West is that there is no ism that can save you. So we can't get a new ism. We can't get a Tantraism. We can't get a New Ageism. We can't get a Greenism. They're all going to be like Animal Farm. You just get a different set of pigs in a farmer's house at the end of it all. There's no ism, because there cannot be a collective answer. The answer has to be at an individual level, right? And this is where Taoism comes in as well, because Taoism is emerged on the end of 300 years of COVID plus Auschwitz, right? The warring states period. Just awful, 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 awful. And in a time when, Confucius said we need culture, and the legalists said we need bigger laws, the Taoists just said, oh God. They didn't have the world weariness of the Buddhists, who were just like, oh, incarnation being. They had a kind of social weariness of it, right? And they were just like, there's no answer here. right? There's no collective answer. There's no answer in the state. And if you must govern the state gently, it's like cooking a small fish, it says in the Tao Te Ching, easily overdone. So hands off, right? In the old days, you didn't need all this. It's a sign of decay, all of that sort of stuff. And it's very hard. What we need is the cultivation of Jing, Qi, and Shen. We need individuals that have gone on a journey of gnosis to start to blur our language together, that have gone on a journey of healing. And only when they have started to come into alignment with those greater principles, with the Tao, right, is it possible to respond to complex phenomena in a way that returns balance, because balance is always shifting. You cannot predefine it, and it cannot be safeguarded by an ism. I mean, for a period of time, but sooner or later, the ism was going to, whatever it is, the Roman ism, the Christian, it'll ossify and it'll torture you. It's a cycle that you go through, right? And so we have to get out of that. And at the moment, we're in a similar piece. It's like the end of the Roman Empire. There's a sense of, even if it takes another 100 years for Rome to fall, it doesn't matter. There's definitely this broad sense. Like 100 years ago, Engels wrote a book who's one of the great historians of the late 19th and early 20th century, called The Decline of the West. Okay, he wrote that in like 1913, right? The Decline of the West. So that's where we're at. We're living those times right now, and it feels it, right? You can feel the sense.
Yeah. That's a beautiful piece, man. And I feel like we're coming sort of to a landing with this conversation, but I wonder, so let's say I'm at home listening to this, and I've been kind of in ism land. I was in environmentalism, or I was a capitalism, or I was an activism, or I was an ismer. I had my thing, and I'm starting to see the, let's call it the law of diminishing returns on my ism, which I know a lot of people who hit that place. They do their solid 3, 4, 5, 8 years of whatever. And it's like, then I started to realize, all my socialist friends were cunts too, or whatever the realization was. They might not say, I would say it like that. They might not say it like that. But let's say I'm recognizing my ism is not enough anymore. And what you just described to me was like, wow, this light touch, this ability to, again, jump traditions, but to listen to the mystery is one bit of language that's in my neighborhood a lot. How would I start to transition into that kind of approach to life? Where would I possibly begin?
Well, I mean, it's a journey to the underworld. Ultimately, what we're talking about is it's not going to be like Jimmy's 5 easy steps to the center of the compass. It always involves a breakdown. Not breakthroughs. Our current myth is the story of progress. It goes onward and up towards more and more and more truth, and better and better and better society, and enlightenment goes up and up and up and up and up.
If I'm getting more enlightened, I make more money, right? That's obvious.
That's right.
Everyone knows
all
that.
of them, they all go together, right? Yeah. We're both more enlightened, more technically advanced, better, and
more attractive. Yeah,
all of it. But the old stories are sort of cyclic, and growth happens through descent into the underworld and breakdown, right? Breakdown, not breakthrough, breakdown. It breaks down. So the journey to go on this is a journey of breakdown. And so if you're in the middle of a breakdown, then that's a good sign, right? But in relation to those isms, is that those isms are gods. They are the old gods, and they are the gods that have, as ideas, have people, right? And this is why the gods are an active part in our own tradition, in the great tragedies of the Greek 5th century BC, and their primary art form was tragedy. And the beauty of tragedy is that there's no good guy or bad guy. It's just tragic, right? It's just like, and he's going to kill her because he needs to get revenge on the thing, but he doesn't know about that, and he loves her, and oh God, no. And so that's an art form we need to really see again, right? The tragedy. There's no cowboys and Indians. There's no good guys and bad guys, but the gods are always in there, and the gods are actively fucking with us. Right? That's what's tragic, is that we are lived by forces that we do not understand, that are greater than us, right? In our biology, right? It's like testosterone. You're like, I don't believe in those gods. It's like, yeah, man, estrogen. She's a goddess, and she can be a wrathful goddess, but she can be a fecund goddess, but she's larger than your woman. and testosterone is larger than you, right? You know, just as examples, these gods are very, very real biological forces that exist all the way down into the laws of physics. They live us out. And so to have an ism is to be possessed by a god. And all of the gods are one-eyed. They don't care about you. They're transpersonal. You're a means toward an end in that thing. And if you align with one of those, you will pay the cost. You know, the same way that a worker pays the cost in a big corporation potentially, you know, like, is that if you align to an ism, ultimately what you lose is your soul, because we are all the gods. We have multiple facets and we must befriend them all. We must befriend, you know, the chthonic deities of the underworld, the ones, whatever you're not aligned with, and what you judge, you know, you show what you're aligned with by what you judge. You're aligned with the Artemisian, free, feminine nature, wildness. Is like, great, well, you've, you know, disowned the Apollonian, you know, like, and that's going to bite you on the ass. Careful, because Apollo's going to get you. If you disown that, it just means he's working unconsciously in you and you're in trouble. And so it's a process of, and because I know you have people that are doing this kind of work, it's a process of integrating pluralism and exploring and re-owning the different fragments of our being, because we will always be possessed by isms, by gods in various different moments. But tyranny is where we get wedded to one and we get stuck in it, and something we identify with something transpersonal, and then your soul is lost. It's gone. There's no you anymore. You're just a mouthpiece for, you know, you hear people, they're environmentalism or feminism or vegetarianism or leftism or Christianity, and you're like, everything that they say you could predict.
It's just like the pre-written FAQ of like, oh, that's the landmark handbook you're saying those words from, or whatever it might be. Yeah,
that's right. And so we all do that at various points. All of us are just mouthpieces. And I'm doing a sock puppet thing here for the people that are only listening.
It's a good sock puppet, people. It's real. Looks real.
For the gods, for these larger forces. And there's something tragic about it, because they are larger and more powerful than us. And that flies in the face of a lot of our sense of heroism about humanity. But COVID, again, something current, brings us to that. This is like a Gaian feedback that's just like, suddenly there, you know, what we couldn't do for the ecology suddenly just got done overnight.
Yeah.
Carbon emissions dropped.
It's what I'm hearing is when you get out of balance, you'll be forced to embrace your opposites is what I'm seeing in this, you know?
Yes, often that's right. What you disown, you marry.
That's nice. Yeah.
But it's not a good marriage.
It's not a marriage of choice or consent.
No. Yeah. It's not of consent. It's not conscious, and it hurts, you know? And so there's a lot of work at this level that I think we need to do as a culture. And what does that mean? They're like, well, great. What do you mean? How do we do this, Jimmy? Then I think it's exploring other stories. Is that people are all about taking entheogens in a range of different circles, whether that be the microdosing happening in Silicon Valley so that they can have increased neuroplasticity to write code better, or whether it's in, you know, our neck of the woods, and, you know, and they're taking ayahuasca and psilocybin or something. But in terms of shaking the snow globe and really changing those stories that we live by and the neural networks that they're plugged into, ingesting mythology, ingesting the old stories, they are something that enters you corporeally. You cannot understand them unless you have, in order to understand them, different neural networks must light up in your brain as you wrestle with them. And they can't be understood and just reduced to, oh, well, that means that, and the snake represents a penis, and therefore it's this. They just have to be lived and held and felt and entered and dreamt, you know. That's where the work takes place. It's a revisiting to the old stories, and it doesn't matter whose old stories they are.
That is a killer piece to end on, I think. I'm just picturing people who listen to this digging out old mythologies and, you know, absorbing the narratives into their bodies and so on. I think that's a good thing.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
If someone is vibing you, Jimmy, and they want to learn more, read more, consume more, if they want to absorb your narrative, where do they go?
They can come find me on social media. Facebook is probably the place where I'm most present, Dr. Jimmy Wollumbin. But you can also look for a website and jump off from there. drjimi.com, and it's DOCTORJIMI.
Yeah, you got a lot of good blogs on that website as well. It's a good place for someone to catch up on a
Great.
lot of your narratives, I think.
Yes, if they want to come study or go on a deeper journey with their medicine and healing, then that's where they'll find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing this, brother. Had a good time, and I'm happy to share these ideas into the world.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thank you, Dane.